just exactly what it is we believe and why we believe it. And our message today is about a man who probably would have been well served by someone reminding him of just exactly what it was he was supposed to be about. The message today is starting off good and ending poorly. And I'll be honest with you, the man we're studying today is a guy named Solomon. You've all heard of Solomon. You know he's a famous man. He was perhaps the wisest and richest man in the world of his time, and perhaps even since his time. But he is a bit of an uncomfortable man, because what happens is we see Solomon starting off very, very well. And everything is doing right, and he is serving God. And then, as Solomon grows older, and perhaps grows comfortable, and because he takes on foreign lives that he was told not to do, he doesn't keep his end of the deal with God. And consequently, Solomon ended poorly. That is not someplace you'll want to be. Our first scripture today is 1 Kings 3:5 through 14, excuse me. And this is Solomon at his beginning, and we see him in a very good place. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give you." And Solomon says, "You have shown great steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness and in righteousness and in unrighteousness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made me servant king in the place of David my father, although I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servants is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for the multitude. Give your servant therefore an understanding of mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this people, this your great people?" And it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. And God said to him, "Because you have not asked that you receive a long life for yourself, or riches, or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I will give you a wise and discerning mind, so that no one like you are before you, and none like you shall rise after you. I give you what you have not asked, both riches and honors, and no king shall compare to you in all your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes, my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days." Now, if I stop right there, we can make a wonderful sermon out of Solomon's humble heart and the way he did, and how he searched God for wisdom and discernment rather than his own benefits. Like I said, if we stop right there. There's a danger in reading the Bible in bits and pieces, because you can start to say, well, you know, this is how things went. This is how things go, and here's how it went. And you don't get the complete story. And most of us are of an age where we can look back and we see more of a complete story of life. We see our failures, we see our successes, we see our regrets of what we should have done, what we could have done, what we might have done. And with Solomon, he most certainly did not listen to everything God said. God gave him very direct instructions, as he did his father, David. Take one wife and leave it at that, and do not marry from these foreign women who will lead you astray. Now, the problem with Solomon is he did become a great and powerful man with worldwide influence, and he saw lots of women that he thought were pretty nice. At the end of his time, Solomon had 700 wives and another 300 concubines. Now, for most of you, you can't even imagine that, and that's a good thing. Let me just tell you, that's a good thing. Solomon was not following God. He was not listening to God. He was not doing what God told him to do. And the thing of it is, it's pretty clear for a man who was extremely wise Solomon was being very stupid. Have you ever met somebody that is so smart they're dumb? Well, my friends, Solomon was just that kind of guy. Extremely brilliant. He could solve problems. He was a man of just all sorts of things, and he knew things. But the basics, fundamentals, he lost. He forgot. Because he wasn't following God as closely as he might. Because where God told him, do not go into these other wives. Do not go into these other countries and take wives from you. And he was a man who knew that law well. And yet somehow found himself willing to say, oh well, maybe that doesn't apply to me. Somehow, I'll be different than what he's talking about. And the truth of that is, you can take that rationalization into the world today. And we'll say, God says I probably shouldn't do this, but I don't see any harm in it, and I see other people doing it, and it's okay. 1 Corinthians 15, 33 through 34 is very blunt. Paul is saying, do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. Wake up from your drunken stupor, as is right, and do not go on sinning. For some have no knowledge of God. I say this to your shame. In the day's world, the world will tell you that everything is acceptable, that God, because he's a loving God, will accept everything you do, and it'll be okay. At the end of the day, he'll go, aw shucks, come on in anyway. Because there is no such thing as right and wrong. There is no such thing as the commandments of God anymore. They want to take those away. And the problem with that is, if you listen to the world, there are consequences to it. Both David and Solomon suffered the consequences of having far too many wives. Their families were disjointed. There was war. David's son actually tried to kill him and do an overthrow. That would not have happened with a single wife and children. But because he disobeyed, David faced the consequences. And Solomon also faced consequences. And we don't have to read very far. We were just in 1 Kings 3. We're going to move down to 1 Kings 11, verses 4 through 11, to see just how badly this ends up for Solomon. And it says, for when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart to other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, and as his heart with David his father. For Solomon went after Astray, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Amalekites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of God, the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place on Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Boy, I'm having trouble with my words today. Ammonites, on the mountain of the east Jerusalem. And so he did all this for his foreign wives, who made offerings and sacrifices to their gods. Verse 9 says, and the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord. And the Lord God of Israel appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning these things that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your practice, you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you. I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. So I guess the question here is, if Solomon did evil and made God angry, did he go to hell? And I'm going to stand right here and tell you, I don't know. There is a dangerous place afoot, and there are plenty of folks out there that are more than willing to write books to tell you one way or the other that he did either go to hell or he did not go to hell. And they'll have all sorts of rationalizations. And I will suggest to you that it's a dangerous game to play to judge whether another person goes to hell or not. We do not get that insight. God does. We do not get to make that judgment. God does. Now, there are times where it is very clear. And with Judas Iscariot, I can most certainly tell you that Judas Iscariot went to hell. Why? Because Jesus Christ himself said he was destined for destruction. He went to hell, and I can be assured of that because of what Jesus told me. Because he is that judge that will make that decision. So if we don't know, is it possible that Solomon did all this garbage and still sneaked by into heaven? And I would suggest to you that many people want to argue that he did because they want to justify their sin. They want to do the bare minimum it takes to get into heaven. You know, if there's a list of requirements, you go, okay, what's the least amount of things I have to do to get there? That's the human nature. I don't want to have to follow God completely. I don't want to have to do exactly what God says. So what's the very least I can do and still sneak by? Now the problem with that is we read in verse 4 through 11 in 1 Kings 11, what Solomon did, although he still professed a faith in God, was he was worshiping other gods. And God's response to that was he was angry. And he warned Solomon. Now, I'm here to tell you, if you're going to be walking a line where God is angry with you, you might want to reconsider life. If you're walking a line that says, you know, I know God does not accept this, but I think I can still sneak by, you might be in trouble. Like I said, I can't tell you whether Solomon is in heaven or not. That's not my place to be. But I can tell you that if, like Solomon, I choose to ignore when God is angry with me because of my sin, I am on perilous footing. There is a dangerous place to be, because I will tell you that for the folks that think they're going to get one step into heaven, barely squeaking by, and the folks like Judas Iscariot, who at the end of the day says, away from me, I never knew you. Matthew 7 is very clear that says, guys, when Christ is judging the world, many will come to him and say, Lord, remember when I did this, and I did that? These are people like Solomon who said, you know, I did a lot of good things. I held a lot of nice positions. And Jesus' response was, away from me, I never knew you. Now, I don't know. Again, I'm not going to judge Solomon. It is not my place to judge. And the Bible does not give us a clear delineation as to where Solomon's heart was when he died. But trust me, making God angry with your lifestyle is not a good place to be. It is not the place you want to do. You do not want to follow in those steps. And it's sad because Solomon started out so well. And I look at myself and I look at my life and I look at other people's lives that I've known for years, and I see how many people really started out well. They came before God and they said, you know, I need to change. And there was a massive change. But slowly over time, they found themselves slipping back into the world. They found themselves, like Solomon, being tempted by his wives to go down roads they knew they shouldn't. And they ended up in places where they definitely did not want to be. Trust me, the idols of this world will always take you away from God. If you want to stay close to God, you stay in prayer, you stay in your Bible, you stay in fellowship with other believers, because that is what is going to keep you on that straight and narrow. We all know of people who go, you know, so-and-so used to go to church all the time, and now they seem to be too busy doing other things. And unfortunately, I see them doing things that are not good. You know, I can think of a dozen people that would fit that criteria. And I suspect each and every one of you know at least that many too. People who were at one time well-founded, who now have kind of walked away because the world's whispering in their ear has told them, you got saved, you said a prayer, you're done, you're good. The rest of the life is just do whatever you want. That's how Solomon lived his life. His wives continued to tell him that, hey, you're good with your God. Maybe you ought to get good with some of my gods. And Solomon saw that and said, maybe that's the right idea. For an extremely wise man, Solomon was an extremely stupid man. And I think, unfortunately, I can't be too judgmental because occasionally I find myself following in his footsteps. Whether Solomon ended up in hell or not is not the critical question for me. The critical question is, where am I going? Am I living a life that's making God angry? If so, the Bible warns me that that's a dangerous place to be. I cannot and I will not try and judge anybody else's salvation. It's not my place. It's not your place. It will be between that person and God on the day of salvation that he will either say, come and be with me, good and faithful servant, or be gone, I never knew you. But I assure you, the Bible is very clear that I am supposed to be about judging my own life. Is what I am doing making God angry? Is what I am doing taking me away from God or towards God? My friends, there are only two paths in life. You are either getting closer to God or you're getting further from God. The idea that there's a middle ground somewhere is a lie the world will tell you. You are either getting closer to God or you're getting further from God. And Solomon, most certainly in the end of his days, was getting further away from God. I want Solomon to speak into my life and hopefully your lives as well, as an example of a man who could have done so much better, who could have listened to God more clearly and saved himself more headaches. The truth of the matter is that even while Solomon is dying, his kingdom is disappearing. And if you read your Bible, you see the sons and the grandsons and the great-grandsons of Solomon. A few actually walk with God, but a great number of them follow in Solomon's footsteps and do not. And we see many times where Israel and Judah are given over to other countries because of their rejection of God. Solomon started out well. He pleased God with his attitude. He was in a right idea. And it didn't take long for a few women that he probably shouldn't have been associating in the first place to take him down bad paths. Unless we just go ahead and say, well, it was all those women's fault, which is always going to be the case. Somebody's going to want to say, well, it was their fault. Solomon made a choice. He started that relationship with them. He should have known better because God had told him better. Solomon, at the end of his day, if he in fact did go to hell, had no one to blame but Solomon. He made the choice to walk further away from God rather than closer to God. You and I have that same choice. I want to look at Solomon, not in judgment, but in warning. I can and I will either walk closer to God today or I will walk further away from God today. My choice, my decision. I can't judge yours. You can't judge mine. But make no mistake, there will come a day when Jesus Christ will judge each and every one of us in how we walk and how we lived. I don't think you have to be a Bible scholar to look at Solomon's life and see the words that said God was angry with him and punished him, to suggest that Solomon was not where God wanted him, and that that's not a place that you and I should desire to be. If God is having to punish you, it is because I am not listening. I am not following. And if that's where I'm at, then I should be very careful and ask myself very seriously, how much am I listening to God? Because obviously, if God is angry with me, there are plenty of places in my life that I am not listening. And that's a dangerous place to be, my friends. Thank you.